Welcome to all.
All right, well, as for introduction, my name is Brian Stibitz. You probably all know my mother, Florence. I'm an attorney in Anchorage, Alaska, but I grew up in Alpena, did my law school at University of Michigan, and moved out here and started having some fun doing some Alaska things. One of the things we do every year that is one of my favorite things up here is we go to the island of Adak. Adak, and I'll get to my first slide, is the little star here. In this slide, it's about 1,200 miles southwest of Anchorage, about 450 miles west of Dutch Harbour, which, if you can see my little arrow, is a harbor here, a major commercial fishing harbor. Originally, Adak was occupied by the Unangan people. In about 1745, Russian fur traders showed up. They enslaved the Unangan people. They would capture the women and children and hold them hostage, force the men to hunt. This system is much like kind of the expansion into the West. Hunting depleted all of the seals and sea otters, which were the main target for these Russian fur traders. The trade moved east towards Dutch Harbour until the fur trade was pretty much wiped out from overhunting, and that left Adak unoccupied. So it sat there mostly unoccupied from 1800s into the 1900s. Occasionally used as a fishing site for native people. The Russians renamed them the Aleuts, and that's probably what everybody knows them now is the Aleuts. 1867, Adak became a part of the United States. The natives continued to hunt and fish there. So I'm going to jump into pictures I've taken here. Here's what it looks like flying into Adak from Anchorage. We get there on a 737 jet. We can use 15,000 air miles to get there, and it's quite an experience hunting on this island. I brought my friend Dave Sleamon here. He's the guy with the white beard. He's going to tell you a little bit about the military history of Adak. Adak became very important again in the 1900s at the advent of World War II. As we all know, in December 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Shortly after that, they had airstrikes at Dutch Harbour. I'll go back and show you where that is. Dutch Harbour is right in here. So June 3rd and 4th, there's airstrikes in Dutch Harbour by the Japanese. They moved out and established military bases in Kiska and Attu right after that bombing attack. That's out here if you can see my arrow. Dave, is this a good time for you to jump in?
Absolutely. So really picking up for World War II, if everyone remembers the Battle of Midway, which was a little southerly from Adak. Adak is in between, equal distance between Tokyo and San Francisco, and it's in the northern Pacific, obviously. And so when Japan attacked Midway, they also attacked Dutch Harbour, as Brian mentioned, as a diversionary tactic, but also they were protecting their northern flank. So as we'll find out in a little bit, the weather there is horrible. So they attacked Dutch Harbour. Horrible weather, not much success. They had intended to land forces there, but the weather was horrible. So what they did is a couple days later, and this is in June of 1942, they landed on Attu and Kiska, which is farther to the east. Well, when you get out there, east and west is kind of crazy, but farther along the chain than Adak. And so they occupied Attu and Kiska. So that was the first bombing of U.S. soil besides Pearl Harbor, was in the Alaska, in the Aleutian chain. So in response to that, Americans built up Adak, landed on Adak, and Brian has some black and white slides of the military presence there.
I'll
Adak
jump
was
into
a
that.
staging
These
area.
are
They
these
built
are
that.
the military in World War II. These
Yes.
next set of slides. Keep going, Dave.
So
Sorry.
that was a big staging area to take back Attu and Kiska. And so the way it worked out was they attacked Attu, and there was about 3,000 Japanese left there. They really weren't supplied very well, and it was horrible weather. The Americans really weren't totally prepared for the weather and the horrible conditions there. Very bloody. There's some great books to read about it. And as a side note, my grandfather, my mom's dad, when he was in World War II, he fought on Attu. And so anyhow, they took Attu, and then they a month later they bombed Kiska, and they went to Kiska, and the Japanese had all snuck out by submarine, and there was no one there. But Adak was now a major supply base, and it became kept getting improved and improved. And the reason they kept it is as the war goes on, they were obviously going to invade Japan at some point. At least that was the plan. And Adak would have been the staging for going through the Kuriil Islands to the northern islands of Japan. That's how all that would have went down. But of course, that didn't happen. And then we come to the Cold War, and Adak was a very, very important base for basically signal spying and also anti-submarine warfare. A lot of the spying missions on Russia were based out of Adak. And so all through the Cold War, it was very, very important. And then in the Cold War, we'll get to why we actually go there. During the Cold War, they obviously imported Caribou. And if Brian wants to talk about Caribou, which I'm sure he does, we could continue on from there and intersperse some of the other odd things about the military that we find when we go there and explore. And we have pictures of that, and we can kind of jump in and out on that kind of stuff.
Good deal. Thank you, Dave.
This is Olin. Could I interject a comment?
Sure.
My dad was a career naval officer, a Cold Warrior, and he was never stationed in the Aleutian Islands, but he went out there several times, and his specialty was communications.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of his job wherever he went was listening to radio signals from the Soviets, essentially trying to figure out what they were up to. So I remember him coming back from the Aleutians and telling stories about being there.
Well, Adak was also part of the DEW line, the early warning missile line during the Cold War. That was, we go to a place called White Alice. That was part of the signals that they would listen to. There used to be some huge antennas on Adak. Now, they've all been taken down, but they were massive. And that's what they did. You're absolutely right. They listened to signals and intercepted all that kind of stuff. They also did a lot of submarine signal stuff. Adak has Adak Harbour, but there's also called Finger Bay. It's a little inlet there where submarines can come in.
There you go. This is Finger Bay right here, Dave.
Yeah, that's the whole complex there. And to this day, when we go down there, because that's one of the places that we go into the backcountry, there's a huge pile of metal submarine net that's on that picture there. It's more to the left, and it's still there. There's no facilities there. It's all leveled.
Here's another picture of Finger Bay right here when they're building it.
So, Brian, are you making these pictures jump around?
Yeah, I don't know how to stop my slideshow. Sorry. We're figure out we're technologically compromised here. But I will do it. We'll just jump around, and you'll get to look at the pictures lots of times. So a couple of points here is the reason they had to put a runway on Adak is that previous airstrip, the closest one to Attu and Kiska, was in Dutch Harbour. The bombers could make it out to Attu and Kiska from Dutch Harbor, but they couldn't, the shorter range fighters couldn't make it out there. So that's why in September 1942, they started to build this airstrip that you're looking at here. As soon as they installed that airstrip, they did do a bombing raid on Kiska, and it was very successful. This was in September of 1942. Several bombers and fighters departed from Adak from its first mission, and they did such a good job of bombing Kiska that it rendered the Japanese unable to actually strike from Kiska anymore. And the U.S. didn't know it, but the Japanese withdrew as far as capabilities for attack capabilities from Kiska after this 1942 attack. And then, as David Sleamon just mentioned, in 1943, the U.S. retook these islands. This is a couple more notes on dates here for you. In 1950, the Air Force transferred this base to the Navy, and as Dave mentioned, they set up an anti-submarine base there, and also a sound surveillance system, or SOSUS. We're going to show you some pictures in a little bit that it will show you the listening stations. It's all abandoned now, and we're able to just go play around in these buildings and check them out. It's a really neat place to go. So I'll jump from the historical photos, and the ones I'm flipping through right here are them building the infrastructure during World War II, 1942-43. And a lot of this stuff is still here. Some of it isn't. But we're going to move on to what it looks like now. As Dave mentioned, in 1953, they brought caribou onto the island. They imported them from the Nelchina herd on mainland Alaska. They say it was for emergency food supply. I suspect it was so the officers had some fun time and some recreation. Now, the weather is so bad out here. There's a quote from Dashiell Hammett in the Battle of the Aleutians. He says, there was a gauge to measure the wind, but it only measured up to 110 miles per hour, and that was not always enough. These buildings get battered. I guess I want to go into the history a little bit more. So during the Cold War, it did serve as a submarine listening station. It closed down in 1997, and everything was abandoned. It's been abandoned since 1997. Adak went from being a city of roughly 6,000 people to about 100 in very short order, and these buildings were abandoned, left to decay, left to the elements. So we get there, and this is what it looks like now. This is the old military housing, as you'll see in this picture. There's just neighborhoods upon neighborhoods of empty condos. If your washer breaks or your house starts on fire, you just go down to another one and occupy another condo because there's so many. If your truck gets the roof blown off by the wind, you just leave it there. Or Dave, remember that one truck? Somebody was probably drinking a little bit too much, and he crashed into a side of a building.
And it stayed there.
Just left his truck there. It's kind of funny.
Hey, Brian?
Yes.
Take your cursor and put it on the photo and do a right click.
Okay.
You should have a menu comes up. Yeah,
Got it.
Pause. Then you can control the picture.
Man, thank you. All right. This is revolutionary. Let's go right back to this, and I'll just pause it. Bam.
While we're looking at all the buildings, one thing to point out is there's no trees on Adak. So when they built all this, even in World War II and all that stuff, everything comes in by barge, or it comes in now or by airplane, all of it. And one of the reasons they closed this base in '97, it was during the base realignment, the BRAC thing, where they closed a lot of military facilities. It just costs a fortune to keep this place going. And with the advent of satellites and satellite technology, they just didn't need all those flights, and they just didn't really need it. It just costs so much to resupply this place. So I've read where it's been almost like $2 billion in infrastructure that they just up and left. Almost all of this infrastructure is built to military spec. A lot of the military buildings are all concrete block, metal roofs, even the ones we stay in. So it's really, really tough stuff. However, if the wind gets in anywhere, it will just rip it to shreds because it's very variable and it comes every day. It's what they call it, birthplace of the winds, I believe.
Yes, birthplace of the winds, and we've experienced this very first time we went there. And we're going to kind of transition from military history, although it's interspersed into the hunting, because as you're out hunting, it is a reminder of World War II everywhere. You'll see things, we'll see it in the photos we'll get to, but there's Rommel spikes that have been laid out in a number of places for anti-tank operations. And we were wandering around one day wondering why there's all these square holes dug into the sides of the mountains. We figured these were foxholes and other things where there's two harbors in Adak, and there's a pass between the two, and that's where we saw a lot of the fortifications when we're out hunting. Side note, if anybody wants to ever get there, 15,000 air miles from Anchorage will get you a ticket. They fly on Wednesdays and Saturdays. It's a very neat hunt if anybody ever wants to get out there. I would go out there just to see it. If you're not even hunting, go out there, rent a condo. You can rent a condo for $100 a day, a truck for the same, and drive around and see these places. It's like being in a zombie apocalypse movie that had, obviously you probably wouldn't need to do much to use this place as a set for it. It's that unique. But we spend a little time hunting, a little time, touring these old relics of World War II.
But it's not scary because there's only about 100 people there, plus the people that are coming in and out. And there's no predatory animals except for yourself. There's no bears or wolves or anything except rats. There's rats.
Rats
and caribou. And that's it. And a lot of people come for birding as well. There's a migratory bird pathway through there. So a lot of people will come out for that. And you could fish there too. We haven't really taken the time to fish, which we really should. But there's good fishing there too. Salmon come in the inlets in some of the places.
I'm going to just go through some of the pictures of things that you could see when you're driving around Adak, and then we'll transition into some hunting scenes. This is, we call this the apocalypse van. This one, pretty sure the roof of it just blew right off. This is pretty close. This is what a condo would look like if you rent one. I'm told you can buy these condos for $5,000 a piece if you'd like one. I think it would cost a lot of money to maintain one, so it's not a great financial decision. But if a boat sinks in Adak, they just leave it there. It's pretty much a rule for everything. It's so much money to get stuff out there or to take stuff from Adak that things tend to just be left in place when they no longer serve their purpose.
That one's been there every time I've gone out there. Probably for you too.
Yeah. There is a lot of unexploded ordnance in Adak. There are parts of the island they tell you just can't go to. And so there you see a lot of signs like this are places that you're not supposed to go to due to unexploded ordnances out there. I think this is an old cemetery we saw. Didn't have anything official on it, but it makes for a pretty neat and moving picture. This is the listening station. I forget who the gentleman was that talked, but this is where they would surveil the Russians. We went into this building. Side note, that is bulletproof glass you can see in this picture with all the shatter marks on it. I don't know what people would test to see what it would be like to shoot, bulletproof glass with guns, but some people do it, I hear.
That's a guard outpost out front there that you would have had to come through with your ID and everything. No windows in that place. Yeah. And it's way out on a point. Remember, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Well, as far
Brian,
from
may I intercept? Brian, this is Jerry Hardesty. I was in the service from 56 through 59, Army Security Agency. I was sent, one of the places we serviced was Adak. This is a station. But I spent 2 years in Okinawa as a Morris intercept operation. and our antenna field was 4 miles around it. So I can imagine what this antenna field was like. They probably shut this down when Morse code was done away with and we went to the satellites and computers. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment.
Yes.
And it's definitely set up for listening. All the floors were on stages in here. You could tell there was wired for lots of electricity to go into this building. It was a really neat setup. But yes, you had a guard post. You have bulletproof glass. And it was definitely used for listening to submarines.
Oh, when we went to work in the evening, when you opened the door, there was a guard sitting there with a loaded M1 carbine, 30 rounds, pointed at you. You better have your ID right in front of you.
Well, nowadays, they let anybody in, I'll tell you that much. This is an old recreation building on Andrew Lake, or Lake Andrew. It's all shuttered, but this one was built pretty well because this one was in really good shape. I didn't put a picture of it, but there's a playground, and so you can just go drive around to all these sites. Unless it's in an area where there's unexploded ordnance, there's nothing to stop you from checking these facilities out. This is a Loran Station operated by the Coast Guard. We didn't make it all the way out here, did we, Dave? This is as close.
No, there was a rock fall. And so we would have had to walk from where we were there. It's like 2 miles out there at that point.
So we didn't get to go, well, we chose not to walk out on this day, but the Coast Guard operated a Loran Station out on this point. I don't think I have a picture of it, but as Dave mentioned, there was a White Alice site, huge antennas up on a hill. It's part of the distant early warning system. Those sites as well were decommissioned, I think, in the 60s. For what it's worth, just a side note, I'm doing environmental law up here. A lot of what we do are dealing with the legacies of some of these military sites, and get pretty familiar with distant early warning sites because there's a lot of them that were bought by telecommunications industries, and they're polluted pretty badly. So we have a lot of cases dealing with these kind of sites. Side note. Here's what the neighborhoods look like in Adak. That's your Apocalypse van there again. Looks like it was a Navy truck. Photos, compliments of David Sleamon. Oh, this is one of my favorites. There's an old McDonald's on the island. Again, town not much smaller than Alpena did have its own McDonald's. As you can see, this was back when you could still get a hamburger for 99 cents. What were they looking at for toys back then? Dinosaurs. So this must have been about when the original Jurassic Park came out. I'm guessing this was shut down roughly 1997, right?
Yep.
But interesting side note. All right, so we tried to, yeah, this is where the story turns a little bit to the gross. We started off staying in those condos, decided to try to make the trip more economical one year, and thought maybe we would try to stay in one of these World War II Quonset huts. This is the one we found as our home base for one of our hunting trips. We called it the Rat Hotel. There were lots of rats living in this thing. You had to watch your food closely or else the rats would get it. You'd hear them walking around all night. I'm told, I don't know if it's true or not, that this particular Quonset hut was a NCO hangout. It wouldn't surprise me because there was a bar inside it, a foosball table. So you can see the bar over here. They had their own stove. It's very moldy now. We lost probably 5 years of our life just breathing in here one night. Another interesting side story. You see these beds. I wouldn't touch them. I didn't, dare sleep on these things. Who knows how long they've been there and who slept on them. But our friend Fred tried it. We were all sleeping in the middle of the night, and this bed actually fell through the floor down to the bottom of this Quonset hut into a den of rats. It was something else. A picture of Dave and I don't. Should we tell the story, Dave?
No.
Okay, we won't. Just say that the rats are great housekeepers. If you leave any food laying around or anything to that effect and go hunting for the day, they come in and clean it up for you on a daily basis. So this is a one and done. I will never sleep in this place again. But if you're so inclined to not pay any money for a condo, you can house yourselves in old Quonset huts that are World War II era construction. They do have nice places to hang your meat and stay dry, but again, the mold and the rats could tend to drive anybody out of this place. So one of the things we've been trying to do, and we'll transition into this as well, is try to stay out in the wilderness on Adak for more than one night without dying. It took a lot of epic failures to get to the point where we had the smarts and the gear to last a night outside without everything falling apart. Then I guess I'm going out of order here, but let's talk about this. We had mentioned World War II relics. This is in Husky Pass. There's a harbor in Adak City, and there's one about 6-7 miles away called Expedition Harbor. We saw many Rommel spikes in this area, foxholes, and there were even tank tracks that had either fallen off or just been left there. But you'll see that kind of stuff. Got to be careful about walking in the snow here. This is a survival barrel. What the Navy did was, do you know how many is it? Like 27 of these things around the island?
Yeah, and they're way, way, way out. In fact, to establish your Adak cred is how many barrels of these you've actually visited. And I think I bet about 4 or 5, but there's some that are way, way out there. Now, I would never stay in one of those rat-infested things.
I would rather die, I think, than sleep in the night in this thing. So it looks like a milk dud factory. It's that the rats have been there that long, but they actually have sleeves of MREs. It's neat. You can see it right here. You see that little tube right there? That we opened one of these one day and it was full of MREs. It was kind of cool. Left it there. The rats didn't eat those. But again, I don't know that I'd want to spend the night. The weather is so bad that was the goal, is if somebody was stranded on a part of an island and didn't have camping gear, you crawl into these survival barrels and shelter for the storm. Here's one that blew off its moorings. It's now kind of out into a little pond. I think I've been to about 8 or 10 of these now, but they all look the same everywhere, except for when they blow in. All right, so this is why we go to Adak nowadays. These are the caribou. They're originally a Nelchina herd caribou from the mainland. Side story, they were numbered to about 800 or so until 1997, when the military left the island. This population exploded. It went from 800 animals to roughly 3,000, 3,500, according to aerial surveys. The caribou sort of ate themselves out of a home, and so they're having issues with nutrition because there's too many of these things. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wants to eradicate the caribou herd as an invasive species, but the 100 people that remain on the island, they make all their money, or most of their money now, renting places and vehicles and giving food to hunters. And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has been convinced by our senators to leave this herd here for hunters, notwithstanding the fact that it is an invasive species. It's threatening some of the plants that are out there. They eat these ferns, Aleutian ferns, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is very concerned about. But I guess economics are overriding concern because they're still there. This is an aerial shot of kind of one of our favorite hunting spots. So this is if you're standing right here in the lower right-hand corner, right behind you would be that submarine base that we looked at in the black and white photos. We hike out and set up a base camp, usually out in this area, and hunt. And you're going to see some photos from this valley and around here, here in a bit. It's not like Michigan. You can't drive your pickup truck to where you're hunting. So you have to butcher these animals and hike them out, which isn't very fun.
Yeah, the road network is really just around the airport and a little bit to the north end. But the south end of the island is where for the most part, all the caribou hang out. And it's a animal refuge. And so there's a line that the roads don't go any farther, and it's all backpacking after that. And Adak is about 33 miles long by about 22 miles wide. And that slide you're looking at right now, that's pretty much the terrain that you're hiking over. It's up and down, it's wet. It's not true Arctic tundra because it doesn't, freeze solid, but it's a couple feet of biomass. And in the summertime, it's all tall grass. So when we're out there during hunting season, it's wet, squishy, and there's no trees. There's no way to real anchor your tent in very well, and you're always wet. And so that's a really good picture of the terrain that you're going over there.
One of the reasons it's so wet is it's volcanic soil, and that tends to hold a lot of water. The weather changes. Your Michigan saying you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. Adak's like that, but to an extreme that you wouldn't believe. It will go from 50 and sunny to snowing sideways faster than you're ready for. That's one of the things you're dealing with in trying to come up with gear that can help you survive out here. And that's kind of the reason that there's these survival barrels tucked away in all parts of the island, is people get in trouble, including the undersigned sometimes. This is a picture going up towards the south end of the island after a little snowstorm. Just give you an idea of what it looks like out there. Again, a lot of days you're hiking in snow. A day later, it's going to be nice. Good luck trying to find the right pair of shoes to wear in this place. Getting into survival stories. So this was the first caribou I ever shot on Adak. This is called Teardrop Lake down here. This is about 8 miles, maybe 9 miles from where you can park your truck and start hiking. We were not very smart back in these days. Now we do things smart, like cut off times for when you're going to shoot an animal. Me and my buddy shot one late in the day. We had no camping gear. We didn't know any better. We shot him, got him cleaned up about an hour before it starts getting dark, and started to hike this 7-8 mile hike out. There's one big pass. Well, there's 2 passes, but there's one really nasty pass between here and where you can park your truck called Gannett Pass. Trying to do that with a 120-pound pack in the pitch black it's near suicide. So we got to the top of this pass and realized we were going to walk off a cliff in the dark if we tried to keep hiking. I didn't have a tent. I didn't have a sleeping bag. I didn't have anything. The weather was getting into the low 20s at this point. My friend, he saved the day. He's like, I got a bottle of whiskey and a Gore-Tex bivy sack. So what we did is we were snuggle buddies that night. Both of us, we stripped out of our wet clothes. We actually had some game bags with us, so we put those on and jumped in, 2 of us like sardines, into a one-man bivy sack, and I've never cuddled with a man like that before and since, but that's what it takes to stay alive some nights. We did make it through the night. We're still really good friends. Got up in the morning and we're hiking out. They had started a search party for us, but we met the search party at the parking lot because we started hiking very early. That was the first, kind of dumb night I spent out in the wilderness, not quite prepared for what it threw at me. But it didn't stop me, and we had many more failures after this one, didn't we, Dave?
We did. One of the problems in Adak, or just a problem you encounter, is there's no real lee of the wind. Because it has been blowing wind there for so long, everything is rounded over. There's just not an outcropping to get behind that you can like tuck out of the wind. It's just not like that. It doesn't exist. I mean, we've looked for lots of places to try to put our tents, and you'll see some later pictures that you can't get behind a tree. You can't get behind a big boulder because the wind is there. And so, as Brian said, you just have to hunker down. I mean, you just can't hide behind something.
The other problem is constantly changing directions. That wind doesn't blow in a singular direction for very long. You'll get days where you get wind coming from every different direction. It's where all the weather patterns meet, out into the middle of where the Pacific and the Bering Sea meet. And so it's kind of just a big swirl, the birthplace of the winds, they say.
That northern Pacific is a warm current, and it hits the cold air coming down from the Bering Sea, and it just swirls. Now, the good thing is you don't get big, it doesn't like get 10 below zero or something, and it doesn't get 80 degrees. When we're out there in November, the median is right around 32, and it doesn't get too much more than that or too less, but it will be ice pellets or rain or wind or everything, and it changes every 15 minutes.
So this is Expedition Harbor, as I mentioned, where we saw the Rommel spikes a few slides ago. This is one of the places you could bring ships in and have safe harbor, the other being the Adak Harbor. You can't see them in this photo, but there's old piers from docks in this area. Getting to survival story number 2. This is a lake called Lake Constantine. We got down here and set up on some caribou. Some might say it was bad shooting. Others might say that their hunting partners scared the animals. For whatever reason, the undersigned didn't make the greatest shot on a caribou. Shot it probably a little bit lower in the shoulder than I would have liked. It proceeded to jump up injured and swim out into the middle of this lake. I hiked around the lake here, set up on this hill, and had a standoff with this caribou. It wasn't going to swim any closer. It saw me. But as this was going on, the weather turned from, maybe semi-nice, as you see in this picture, to snowing sideways, sleeting sideways. Seeing this storm come in, we decided we're going to try this. This was the first night we were ever going to try to spend a tent out on Adak. So we had, it was my little Nemo tent. Remember, Dave? And
little 2-man.
Yeah. So I ended up seeing the storm coming in. I lost my patience, and I shot this caribou as it was out in the middle of this lake. I had to swim about 150 yards out to get it after it was dispatched. I think Dave saved me. He went and set up a tent. I cleaned this thing, probably fastest I've ever cleaned an animal, but fortunately, good hunting buddies, save your bacon, and Dave had a warm tent, hot tea, waiting for me after I swam out and cleaned this animal. Now, our comfort was very short-lived. Again, it's always raining. It's very wet. The water level raised probably 6-8 inches on us that night as we're sitting in our tent, and before long we were swimming, and it was time to leave. So that was epic failure number 2, trying to camp out in Adak. Anything else about this place, Dave, you want to say before I leave?
We had to carry out, I think we got 2 caribou there, 4 guys. So we had to hike that out, but all of our gear was just soaked. And if you've ever had to backpack with all your gear completely wet, it was miserable. And this time it just decided not to stop raining, because we were laying in the tent like, well, it's going to stop and we'll get going. And it just didn't. So totally wet. Had to hike. I think that was around about 1,000-foot pass. So the picture, we're coming down the pass. So we had to hike that back out and then get back to, I think we were at the Rat Hotel. Was that a Rat Hotel?
That was Rat Hotel night, yes.
Right. So it was a miserable slog out with all the meat and all of our wet gear. And we were just wet from head to toe. The only good thing is if you keep moving, you won't freeze to death, but it was not fun.
All right, well, moving on to epic failure number 3.
Oh, yes.
So this is, and I don't know, this is a screenshot, isn't it, Dave, from the weather while we were out there on trip number 2?
Yes.
For you.
That's it.
Adak's over here. The weather station said the wind was 86, 90 miles an hour or so when it hit us. But we had a great day of hunting. We went out the year after, and everybody got animals on the first day. It was sunny and not windy, which was kind of weird. And after a while, we were reveling a little bit. It gets to be late in the night. We're seeing stars. And one of my friends he called it. He's like, this is really weird. I've got a really bad feeling about this. I've never been here when the weather is nice. Pro tip here, if the weather's nice in Adak, maybe you should be concerned, because it went from being calm and stars at about 1 in the morning to raging winds, and you say it was probably close to 90 miles per hour where our tents were located, within an hour or two. This was the last picture of Dave's nice tent. Look at how well this thing is tied down. Other friend, he only had 2 guidelines on his. This is the last known photograph of that nice tent right there. But I don't know if it was worse to lose your tent or have what happened to Dave's tent. So this was right as the weather started to change on us. This is the morning after. Well, let's get back to the storm. So it did hit us really hard. We tried to jump in our tents. It didn't take very long for this storm to break every hole in Dave's tent, at least in 28 pieces, 30 pieces.
Oh yeah.
Fortunately, it was tied down so well. The tent that was right here that you saw in that last picture, we've never seen again. We think it's in China right now. Not really sure where it went. But that tent blew away. We had to hike about 8 miles out from this spot. Again, I was on a thermarest. As the water slowly fills your tent up, you get to the point where it starts hitting your mouth, and no matter how hungover you are, you're going to get out of that tent. What was that, 4 or 5 in the morning by that point?
We had to wait until daylight because the storm was coming in, and it was snow. As you can see, there was snow and cold, so you couldn't see where you were going, and there's no trails there, so you have to have some visual reference. And so as soon as we got a little bit of light, the storm was roaring at that probably 60, 70 miles an hour, and we had to make it out. Now, the only saving grace of this whole thing was that the wind was at our back. So it pushed us out. I couldn't imagine if you were going to try to go against that wind. And this was coming back the next day, because we left the meet. We just got ourselves out. We really didn't take any gear. I mean, it was a survival situation, and we had to get out. But we came back the next day. As you can see, it's sunny, and we hiked out all the meet.
So that was, I guess that was my epic fail number 3.
Ryan?
Yes.
We had a question come in through chat. How many times have you been to Adak?
I'm going to go probably 8 or so, maybe 9.
Yeah, 3 for me.
Yeah.
And that's coming from Michigan.
Yeah.
I really like it.
So these pictures are a conglomeration of all the different trips, not in a particular order, but what I've learned is you got to spend a lot of money on a tent. What we're using these days, these are Hilberg tents. You can adjust these things to, it's a tunnel that really handles the wind really well. But I've actually been in standing, 6 inches of water in this tent, and the seams are so good in these tents, you don't get wet. That's pretty much what it's taken. The last 3 times I've been there, we've spent almost the whole time out in the wilderness instead of the condos. I like it better because this is probably a camp 4 miles away from where you park your truck. It's probably a 20-minute drive from the condo to where you park. You lose a lot of time in the mornings. And for those of us that like to sleep a little bit, I just prefer to wake up out there. So we got really nice Hilberg tents and have figured out a system to survive overnight. But you're seeing the evolution of getting there and how many times we failed before we got to this point. This is my friend Dan. This is Teardrop Lake. Just kind of giving you an idea. What you do is to hunt these things, you climb up into high places. They're not, there's not caribou running around everywhere, but you can see if the fog and rain isn't in the way, you can see, 10 miles in a lot of directions. You sit in glass for the caribou. Once you find out where there's a few, they kind of tend to run in herds of 8, 10, 12, 20 animals. You find a herd and you use the terrain to get you close to them. Some more shots of this one's in Husky Pass. This is just again showing you the contrast in weather. It's sunny in one section, squall in another. This is a lookout in our valley, kind of where we get most of our caribou these days.
And with that squall, you can be hiking in a t-shirt. And the good thing out there, it's open enough. You see it coming. It's like, all right, and you just drop it, put a fleece on, put your Gore-Tex on, and get all all tied in, and then just ride it out, and then maybe take it all off. It's just back and forth all the time.
Here's a caribou for you. This is on Lake Betty. This is my friend Chip. So you'll notice these antlers aren't very big on these animals for the size. So this animal, if you shot it on the North Slope, would have antlers like you wouldn't believe on it. I don't know that they've determined why, but they're having antler growth issues nowadays out there. I think it's malnutrition, but it might be overhunting. But I think at least that it's that these caribou have eaten most of the good browse. They're actually swimming now to other islands. Side note, there's another island, there's a half a mile span of water between Adak and Kagalaska. The caribou herd has spread to that other island to find new browsing areas. And I think that the problem is they're starting to not have enough nutrients to support the herd. So as mentioned, it's not like you can drive your pickup truck out here. You've got to quarter these animals in the field. We carry game bags with us. You chop them up into quarters and take your tenderloins and your back straps and stuff them all in your backpack to get them back to the truck.
And Brian from the chat, why do you keep coming back here?
The food is good. So I don't know. I grew up, sorry, Dad, but I was probably the worst deer hunter in the world. I couldn't sit still for 10 minutes, let alone 3 or 4 hours for what it takes. And I guess I didn't really like the taste of the deer as much. I'm convinced that it's not that white-tailed deer don't taste good. I think that maybe it's not good to shoot animals in the middle of the rut and then hang them up on a pole and brag about them for 2 weeks and then clean them. These things, in my humble opinion, taste a little bit better because you get them off the hoof right away. We get the meat hanging and chilled as fast as possible. I get about 200 pounds of meat a year doing this trip, and we eat caribou regularly at my house. I don't feel bad about having dinner parties. I'm not spending hundreds of dollars on meat. They're just going to eat our caribou. So it's a good thing for hosting parties, and it tastes really good. It's lean. That's why I keep coming back, the adventure. But I guess nowadays it's more fun. It's kind of even more fun to bring people who haven't done it before, let them do the shooting, let them learn the ropes. Nowadays I don't care to even shoot animals if I don't have to. I'd rather just go teach people how to do it. But I guess that's why I hadn't thought about it. Have it. Here's what the meat looks like quartered out. And we'll throw that into those mesh game bags and toss it into backpacks. A couple of trips ago, Dave and I were out and we found, I don't know what the infrastructure was, but we found all sorts of metal out there. This was 8 miles from a trailhead.
Bunch of T-posts.
Yeah. What do you think it was?
They were T-posts. I think someone may have tried to make a hunting blind, just like a little screen, and because that would definitely work out there. We tend to just keep moving. But anyhow, we found enough of those that we were able to make a little game hanging rack to dry it out a little.
And you can see the game bags here is what we're carrying them in. And this tended to be some of the best meat we brought out. I guess the other thing, I try to shoot the females. They taste better. And that's probably one thing for the meat quality. This is the end of a haul for us. You tend to take a lot of meat home with you. There's also other animals out there to hunt. If you're a bird hunter, there are a lot of ptarmigan out there. These are some tasty critters. This is my nephew, John, mighty ptarmigan hunter. He fed the camp with some tasty bird on this day. Oh, another neat thing about hunting here, the eagles. So if you get an animal down out here, all of a sudden, and I don't know how they know it, but they know it, you start getting hundreds of eagles that start flying around you. Like it's really neat because I've had times where you'll shoot a caribou and you'll have 80, 100 eagles in a circle, and they don't get too close to you at first. They stay about 30 feet away, and that you'll have a big circle of eagles staring at you as you're trying to clean this animal. And they're kind of funny because if you look at them, they don't like to make eye contact. They look away like you're not there. So you can play little games with the eagles and make them uncomfortable by looking at them. But they get on a carcass immediately after it's shot. The second you shoot one, they show up. And I've got a friend, Kevin Fisher, who took these photos, takes great eagle photos. So I'll just run you through a couple of his photographs.
And they are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really, really big. They're unnerving.
So here's a caribou. You know, the second you leave and get 20 feet away from this carcass, they jump on it and they pick it clean. If you go back to a caribou the day after it was shot, these bones are actually white, like you'd think they'd been there for 15 years. They pick it clean. There's nothing left when they get done with it. A couple more eagle shots. Oh, this is me bragging now. This is my best 10 seconds of shooting ever. It's 4 caribou I got Lake Betty. My friend Dan's not the greatest shot sometimes, so I was just trying to make sure he didn't shoot any of these animals in spots where we got less meat recovered. It's being a little selfish this day, but this is kind of what it looks like after a good shooting session. And I'm back to the beginning. I don't know how long I'm supposed to talk. Looks like we've been going about an hour. I guess we open up to questions or any other slides you'd like to see.
What did you
Anybody
eat?
here still?
What
We're
did
here.
you eat? Mute.
Somebody had a question. Go ahead.
They're like 12-foot tide changes. Is that the same?
Can we go back to the slide?
Hi there. Somebody had mentioned going back to a slide, but I think whoever it was got muted. I'd be glad to.
Did you mute everyone?
I
don't
didn't.
know. I don't know what I did. I'd like to go back to the condominium slides in that area and the Rat Hotel because I missed seeing it.
All right. Can do.
Thank you. Oh, here.
Yeah, in World War II, there's a lot of Quonset huts all through there. They were used as ammunition bunkers and all different reasons. Again, because those are all prefab structures that could all be hauled in on a cargo ship.
Here's your Quonset hut, Dave.
Some of them are really, really old, and obviously some were repurposed as to little party places out off the beaten track, and that's what the Rat Hotel, affectionately named the Rat Hotel, that was definitely what that was.
Here we go. Here is the Rat Hotel coming up. There we go. So yeah, was it Jack that told us that it was an old NCO hangout? Probably.
Yeah, I'd also, when I first went out there, I was reading a lot of history about the place, and I got on a few chat rooms of servicemen that had stayed out there. It's kind of funny. A lot of people had a good time out there. They thought it was, a 2-year time out there, if you're into that. But a lot of people, that was the worst place in the world to go to. I mean, it is a long way from anywhere, and there's really nothing to do. But one thing, which usually gets mentioned, is they did have a bowling alley there. And this is my one souvenir that I have from Adak. I bought it they had a little tiny store there. And I have a real AMF bowling pin, which my wife has of course, banished from our living room. I like it. But yeah, they had I think that's why the Caribou was there. You could go out and hike, and that's why they put those survival barrels out there. So some people loved it out there, and some people just hated it. You know.
Dave, Jerry Hardesty. The tour I was offered was 12 months in Adak versus 24 months in Okinawa. I took Okinawa.
Smart move.
Yeah, you're a 3-hour flight from Anchorage. You know, I mean, it's a ways, and that's the closest place to go to anywhere.
This is Olin. The description of the terrain and the weather reminds me of the passage in Charles Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle of Tierra del Fuego. And if I recall correctly, he describes natives there who endure very harsh conditions, cold, wind, rain, just about all the time. The remarkable thing is because it was so wet all the time, they didn't wear any clothes. They figured out that going around without clothes was going to be more comfortable than being in wet clothes all the time. And they lived on a diet of shellfish and seaweed. And I think they picked up 2 or 3 of them and took them back to England. One of them, I think, became educated in some kind of English school. But anybody else been to Tierra del Fuego or remember that passage from the Voyage of the Beagle?
Here, I would tell you that the natives tended to wear clothes in these parts. They would make parkas out of fish skins and sew them together. A traditional, it's probably a little bit not quite cold enough to wear fur seals, fur from the seals or sea otters. You'd be a little too warm. But what they would do is take fish skins and dry them and sew them, and you could make neat parkas out of them. It's a craft that people still work on here, but that was one of the ways they would stay dry.
Any other questions for Dave and Brian?
Yeah, just a side on those Rommel spikes. They were like a big 6 or 8 foot long piece of kind of like a rebar. And they would take that end, sharpen it, and make it into like a pigtail buried in the ground. And those were to prevent like any vehicles coming over the pass, tracked vehicles, anyone invading, because it would get in the track and it would just totally screw it all up. And they always talk to you about stepping on those. I mean, they're pretty big. It's like a big 3/4 inch piece of rebar. So, and over time they're dull. I don't think it would actually go into your boot. But it was pretty cool to actually find one of those just in the middle of nowhere, because really once you get out of the little road network there, it's end of the trail. There's no trails. There's nothing posted. There's not really a trail on a map. There's a few dotted lines, but even the caribou tend to go everywhere. So it's not like you're on a game trail. You just kind of like got to pick your way along to where the passes are and the best way to get through them.
What did you eat and how did you cook it when you were on these trips?
We tend to use kind of similar like backpacker meals, but we have a friend who dehydrates her own backpacker meal. So we tend to bring a lot of dried beans,
Okay.
fried rice, things like that you can boil up real fast and then supplement it with caribou meat. Maybe we're overly optimistic, but we always kind of don't bring enough meat and tend to try to eat caribou as much as we can, and ptarmigan, but it's mostly dried rice, dried beans, burritos, anything light that provides lots of calories.
And we get a white gas from Jack there, a guy that'll supply us with the little white gas for our stove. So we're able to use that.
Yeah, that's another logistical problem is you can't fly, these little canisters of butane, or you can't fly white gas and there's not a lot of it there. This year we tried something different and we used unleaded gasoline in one of these universal burners. It worked okay, but not as nice as white gas. Didn't burn as clean.
But then how long are you on one of these trips?
7 days, usually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're usually hunting right off the plane. Like, get the truck, go to the trailhead, and we're out camping that night. Try to get 5 miles in over the pass.
Okay. Okay.
Hello, Brian. It's Mrs. Shoemaker, Joy Shoemaker. Nice
Hi.
to see you, hear you. It sounds pretty exciting. I didn't realize you were living in Alaska. It's a beautiful country, part of the country. It's our country now. But anyway, great. Thank you for all the information. Really appreciate it.
Good to
Best
hear from
wishes.
you.
Yeah, you
Joyce
you can talk now. I unmuted you.
You unmuted me? Okay. Brian, did you have to bring your own water, or is there water available there?
There's lots of water. So I don't even think you need to filter it. There's so many places it's just coming out of the mountains. I started just drinking it straight from the springs and whatnot. But we bring a filter, usually a gravity filter, for those people that worry about it. But there's a lot of artesian wells if you look around, and again, it's not much there to pollute the water. So I don't have Giardia yet, and I've been just drinking straight from it.
Okay.
Brian? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, this is Donna Gillard. This is our next.
Hi, Mrs. Gillard.
It's just wonderful. This is our first Zoom presentation, so I haven't quite figured it out. I don't have my name on there. I have our iPad 4. Your mom will wonder who iPad 4 was. It was me. But we thoroughly enjoyed it. I was telling Matthew you were doing this, and we were sure hoping to hook up. It was great. Thanks so much.
Really good to hear from you.
You too. You too. I was excited when I read this. I said, is Brian in Alpena? Is coming home for, and then I realized.
Well, say hi to Matt and Jesse for me.
Oh, yeah, I will. Thanks.
Yeah. Brian,
Yes.
are there any women on this island?
We take a couple, 3 there. Usually with us, we bring them with us, the hardy ones at least. But there's 100 people on the island. I would say, there's not a lot of women on the island. What they have going on, I guess I could have gone into the presentation more. Commercially, there's now an airstrip there. It's federally subsidized, part of the mail run, and as well, it's I'm told by my commercial pilot friends that this airstrip's one of the few places you can land if you're going from the U.S. to Asia if you get in trouble. So they maintain this airstrip. Mostly men out there. You either work at the airport or you work at the fish processing plant. And I don't, this is just anecdotal, but I'll bet you it's 8 men to 2 women if I would guess.
They worked really hard to get that fish processing plant going so that they would have some sort of economy besides just the hunting. And not only that, the last time I was there, which was 2018, they just got the crab fishermen had a base there. So we were able to get a pretty good score on crab right off the boat, right out of the harbor. And that made for some great parties back in Michigan, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, they have a king crab processing plant, and we actually saw the boat coming in. One of the guys hunting with us is a commercial fisherman. He knew the guy that ran the plant. So we were able to buy, crab at probably a 50% discount and I think we took a couple 100 pounds of crab home with us on that trip as well.
Anyone else? I guess with that, we'll let
Dick?
you go back.
Dick?
Question? Yep.
Are we going to be able to see this on YouTube?
Yeah, eventually.
Okay.
My queue is backing up.
It's terrific. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Brian and Dave. It was Well, I've done a little deer hunting in Michigan, but nothing like this. So thank you very, very much.
Almost the same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
right.
yeah. Except you're miles away. Okay. And,
Oh, yeah.
and you're still alive. Thank you.
Stay that way.
Thank you for the presentation.
My pleasure.
Anyone else?
Dick, I want to thank you also for spearheading this thing. It has given us another lease on life, so to speak. Again, thank you, and for all that you do. Thank you, Dave and Brian, and we'll be glad to be fun to see your parents, Brian, when we get back to our normal here in the States. So, again, thank you again. Bye bye.
Take care.
Brian,
Well, we're always
Thanks.
looking for great presentations. So if anybody has any ideas on presentations, programs, please let Florence or myself know.
We could probably come up with something else Alaska related one of these days. People wanted it.
We'll start working on it.
yeah, that would be great, Brian. This is Ben Granlund. Thanks a lot. Good talking to you.
Good to talk to you as well.
Well, I think if there's anybody wants to chime in with the thank yous, go ahead.
Thank you for the pictures, Brian. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, I guess we'll end the meeting. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and especially Brian and Dave. It was a great dialogue you brought along to the slides. That was very interesting. The terrain is certainly unusual. Have you ever been there in the summertime?
No, I'm gonna try it one of these days. It's just the nice thing about going when it's cold is the meat stays cold. So we,
Right.
that's kind of the reason we pick that time of year.
I was just wondering if it turned green.
It is. It's lush green and the grass is over your knees.
Yeah, long grass.
This is Ray. I'd like to thank everybody. This is quite an experience. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye, Ray.
Ray's a first-time Zoomer, so we finally got him a webcam to connect. Anybody else?
Hey, thanks, Brian.
Take care, Sherry.
Next time you can do something on skiing, how about?
I would love to. I would love to. I'll set it up.
Go back to the Arctic.
I didn't realize Sherry was on.
What? I hear a few people talking. Anybody want to comment?
No, that was me. I didn't realize my sister-in-law was there. I didn't scroll down to see who all the people were. So I don't know if she's still there. That was Sherry.
I'm still here.
Okay. Good. I'm glad you took advantage of it.
Oh, this was great. It was good. Tells me I don't really want to take that trip.
I wish is John still on?
Yes, I am.
John went along on one of these trips. This is my grandson.
No, I got a picture of him. Here we go. Hold on a second. Oh, right here.
So I don't know if he has a few comments.
This guy right here.
I think Brian captured it pretty well. I guess one story that I thought was kind of cool is when we were driving in on the first day we were there. I saw an eagle perched up on this pole, and being from Michigan, I thought, oh, that's so cool. There's an eagle, and I told that to one of the other guys that was in our group, and he's like, oh, you haven't seen anything yet. So that's one thing that I really found cool is these hundreds of eagles, like Brian was talking about, that would flock to your kill sites. But just being from Michigan, it's unlike anything you'll ever see.
Thank you.
And I'm always happy they come back alive. You never know up there.
That's the fun part, coming back alive.
I've had lots of experiences where people have come back almost not alive. I could do a presentation on my close friends. I'm like the only friend I have that hasn't been medevaced yet in Alaska.
Oh, gee.
And we drove to the Arctic Circle, but nothing like this.
Actually, Dave, Fred, who was on this trip, was recently hospitalized pretty bad. He drove his snow machine off a cliff, broke his back.
No.
He's relearning to walk right now.
No.
Oh yeah, but he's back again. He can walk on his own right now, so it's way better than how he was 2 months ago.
Because he was the biggest heavy meat hauler of anyone.
Yeah, he's not going to be hauling meat for a while, but at least he's not paralyzed, so.
That's good.
That's good. That's dangerous. Anybody else? We're slowly losing participants, so unless you got 10 seconds if you want to say something. Otherwise, I'll end the meeting and say thanks to Dave and Brian.
Well, thank you, David Sleamon, for doing this. Appreciate it.
Back in the good graces.
Well, maybe not.
Back on the island.
Okay, well, I'm going to end the meeting unless somebody wants to say something. Okay, great. Thank you to both of you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.